Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Makoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description. Morning, almost noon. The sky, clear and clean, created an atmosphere of the same clear and cloudless mood for most passers-by. Some were hurrying about their business, and some were just strolling along the numerous streets of the village. At the same time, the bright and warm sun tickled the face of a sleeping boy through the window. He was smiling blissfully, and his hair shone golden in the sunlight. For a moment, wrinkling his nose, the boy sleepily opened his eyes, after which he stretched, yawned, and froze. With his eyes wide open in surprise, the boy looked at his right hand. And how can you not be surprised if only yesterday you had a metal prosthesis instead of this very hand? The boy nervously pulled off the blanket and stared at his leg in surprise. You guessed it, yesterday there was armor in that place too. Edward mentally went over the events of yesterday. Here he was fighting envy, here he was seeing Al die, here he was trying to save his brother and getting into the gate. And here he was. All that was left was to figure out where this, here, was. Suddenly a thought came into the blonde's head, making the boy sit up abruptly in bed. What happened to Al? The pain of uncertainty choked Edward. Would he see his brother? Was he alive? Edward didn't know. And it seemed he would never find out. A bitter smile, unusual for the guy, appeared on his lips. How could this be? He had been trying his whole life to return his brother's body to see his smile again, to hug him. And now he was sitting on a bed in an unfamiliar apartment, with a whole arm and leg, and had no idea what was wrong with Alphonse. Evil irony. Alone. From now on, absolutely alone. And loneliness is the real pain. Perhaps this is how Al felt when he found himself in the armor? Maybe all this is retribution for sin. Probably. Edward sighed heavily and tried to stand up. Why did he try? Because as soon as his left foot touched the floor, he felt the roughness of the boards again, heard the creak of the floorboards, not at all like the wood and auto armor had creaked, and fell back onto the bed. His fingers dug into the thin sheets, and his lips stretched into a joyful smile. He felt the softness of the fabric, the folds in it, felt the urge to jerk his shoulder because of the awkward position. And it was wonderful. No, not even that. It was magical. A long-forgotten feeling of euphoria rolled over him, when all problems recede one step, allowing him to simply enjoy the moment. But, as much as Ed would like to lie around like this forever, digging his right hand into the bed, smiling stupidly and happily, practicality took its toll. Therefore, getting up with some regret, but not ceasing to smile, the guy went in search of a mirror to find out what he looked like now. The mirror was found quite quickly where it was expected, in the bathroom. But what he saw was not at all like Edward's memories. The mirror reflected a boy of about 12 or 13, quite athletic in build and with a tattoo on his stomach. The first thing Ed noticed was that the body was definitely not his. Then the question remained open. Who? The guy sighed, looked at himself in the reflection again, then shook himself and looked out the window. Yes, there was a window in the bathroom. The scenery surprised him. Very much so. The town looked more like a big village. Apart from the crowds, it had nothing in common with Central. Both the clothes and the appearance of the people were completely different. Ed even noticed a girl with lilac eyes in the crowd, and a guy with poisonous green hair. If he had kept his golden hair and eyes, he still wouldn't have stood out in any way. Realizing that since he was here, he would have to somehow get used to it. Still paralyzed by surprise, but a little less, Edward went to the table and opened the first drawer he came across. Its contents were of little interest. With one exception, there was a small thick notebook covered in black leather. Edward carefully opened it and read. Property of Uzumaki Naruto. Probably a diary, the boy thought. A photo fell out of the diary, and carefully picking it up, Edward saw a young man with a scar on the bridge of his nose, hugging the shoulders of the very boy whose body he found himself in. Elric turned the photo over and read the entry, written in a neat adult's handwriting. To Naruto's favorite student, from his teacher Irika, so that's what his. My name is now. Naruto. Ed drawled, as if tasting the name. Sounds right. The boy chuckled to himself. Carefully putting the photo back and closing the diary, Edward put it in the desk. Now the boy decided to explore the situation outside. Throwing open the closet, the boy quickly found the orange suit he was wearing in the photograph. By the way, there were no other things in the closet. In general, and got dressed. It's not that our hero enjoyed the situation, most likely, he was influenced by the understanding that he had to learn to live in this world if he didn't want to die and ultimately return to his brother. And he had no choice. As soon as the boy pulled the door towards himself, a man wearing glasses and a headband with an emblem appeared in front of him. By the way, it seemed to Edward that he had seen it somewhere before. I remembered! That one! Teacher Irika, from the photo, has the same one! The thought flashed through his mind. Naruto, why are you skipping school again? Get back to the academy! The bespectacled man roared. Edward decided to pretend that he didn't understand what the man was getting at. He forced out a muffled groan like, but it seemed that the uninvited guest didn't even need his reaction. He unceremoniously grabbed the guy by the sleeve and dragged him along. No, well, I'll be damned, he shouts at every corner that he's going to be Hokage, and yet he skips the academy. What an unbearable boy, the capricious stranger lamented, dragging the unresisting Ed. A woman stopped them on the street. Ebisu-san, good afternoon. After greeting him, the lady cast a suspicious glance at the boy in the orange suit and added to clarify, you are taking Naruto to the Shinobi Academy, right? Yes, as you can see, Kurinai-san. This blockhead is skipping school again. Please tell Irika-san that the teacher in Class C is sick and he will have to replace him, she said politely and hurried away. Well, there you go, Edward thought with relief. One less problem. At least I know where I'm going in his name. It's probably better to keep quiet, so as not to accidentally blurt out something unnecessary. A boy with golden hair burst into the classroom, accompanied by the glances of his new classmates. Oh, Naruto, the same Irika from the photo voiced his surprise out loud, after which he frowned. Why were you late? I overslept, sorry. Ed began confusedly, but they didn't let him finish. He was going to skip school, Ebisu stated after Naruto had entered. Edward bowed his head guiltily, making it seem as if the boy was ashamed. But was he really ashamed? Probably not. It was just a very awkward situation, and he had to choose a course of action. If the boy didn't want to become a target for a dozen eyes staring curiously in his direction, he was forced to feign remorse. Okay, the teacher said, more tired than angry, sit down. Then, Edward walked to the end of the class and sat down at a desk. Alone. POV Edward. I tried to sit as quietly as possible. It was strange, in Amestris. As a state alchemist I wasn't shy about attention, but here. These looks, they were so angry? Most of them really were. Throwing the gloomy thoughts away, I tried to concentrate on the lesson and, it seems, realized that instead of alchemy they used something else here, shinobi technique. Very interesting. By the way, I will need to, if the opportunity arises, check whether alchemy works here. But that's a little later. As I understand it, unlike alchemy, jutsu is used due to chakra, which is not unlimited. This world was radically different from mine. Not much was clear to me yet, but the confidence that I would be able to get used to it gradually grew stronger. My optimism did not leave me, despite the hostility of those around me. And yet, what kind of person was this Uzumaki Naruto that he was so disliked? I mean, now it's me. So now everyone to a friendly sparring, said the sensei, smiling. It seems that this person is the only one who does not treat Naruto, me with hostility. Friendly sparring. It turns out to be a fight, right? We left the classroom in a disorderly crowd. It seemed that Naruto and I had no friends. Each of the boys was approached by someone. Only I and a boy with jet black hair were left without a partner. Although no, as soon as the young man stopped, a crowd of girls immediately surrounded him. Wow, he's popular! We were standing in the courtyard when the sensei came to the center, announcing the fighters. I decided to evaluate the fighting technique and my chances. In general, they all fight pretty well, but they still lack practice fighting a real opponent. Yes, the probability of my victory was quite high. Remember Scar, dodging his attacks was not easy, but I managed. The only one I could not defeat for a long time was Al. Memories of my brother made me sad. How is he? Why didn't I listen to him then? After all, human transformations. Next are Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto. The sudden rush of memories was interrupted by the sensei's voice calling my name. Well, I went out onto the field, and in front of me stood the same brunette I had noticed from the very beginning. He stared into my eyes. Smiling slightly, I noticed in his gaze hatred. Yes, that was the feeling that clouded the young man's gaze. The strange thing was that the hatred was not directed at me. It was a part of this man. I've seen people like him. Together with Al. No, it's not time to think about Alphonse. I decided to distract myself from bitter thoughts. I still need to fight. He reminded me of the Colonel's self-confidence to spare, the same smug expression on his face. I'll get my revenge when I wipe that grin off his face. Everything has its advantages. We've started. And the battle began. The stands roared, the girls in love with Uchiha chanted his name. Edward hung his head in resignation. It turns out that there really are no friends. No one, he thought sadly. After all, I had Al, Winry, Grandma Pinako, that same Mustang, and this boy is all alone. They don't love him and don't want to help him. No, I'll fix it. I'll definitely fix it. It was bitter for Ed to realize that there are such unhappy people, eternally lonely and unhappy. It was offensive to the point of tears, but it was not his style to give in to tears. He always preferred to do something, to change. And now he would not change his principles. The blonde froze in anticipation of the attack and must have chosen the right tactic. Uchiha rushed at Edward with all his might, raising his hand to strike, but he easily dodged the attack. As soon as Sasuke was behind his opponent, the guy grabbed his outstretched hand, twisted it behind his back and, lightning fast, pinned Mr. Popularity to the ground, and sat on top of him. Everything happened very quickly. Only one thing was clear: Edward no. Naruto had won. The stands fell silent, their eyes wide with surprise. Never in their lifetime had Uzumaki won, and now everything happened differently. Edward himself smiled blissfully. At that moment he felt as if he had just given the Colonel a good thrashing. Uzumaki Naruto won, Iruka said, not hiding his kind, gentle smile. He was happy for this little brat who was always so eager to win, who finally realized his wish. Uchiha Sasuke was no less perplexed than the spectators of the fight. The boy he had previously easily defeated had just defeated him, even more easily. Elric stood up from his former opponent, then turned and walked away, modestly disappearing into the crowd. The classmates still couldn't stop whispering, and Yumino Iruka gave Naruto warm smiles and a caring look, because the life of his dear student was changing for the better. But something had changed in the student himself. The dark evening sky is illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun, a light breeze blows, pleasantly refreshing. The streets of Konoha are empty, everyone has long since gone home. Well, almost everyone. Blurred silhouettes appear on the flat roofs every now and then. Freezing for a moment, and disappearing again, shinobi inspect the sleeping city, so that no one dares to disturb the peace of peaceful citizens. In one of the dorm rooms, lying on a futon and opening his right eye, a short blonde boy, Uzumaki Naruto, recalls the events of the past day. It still seems to him that everything that happened was just a stupid dream, and in a few moments he will wake up and see his younger brother again, hear the Colonel's mockery. But this is not a dream. Gradually the Fry's eyelids grow heavy, his eyes close, and Morpheus, smiling tenderly, embraces him. But even after dozing off, he still plays over what happened in his head, makes some calculations, draws conclusions. But that's just the way he is, and there's nothing to be done about it. After finishing the sparring and studying, Edward, or rather Naruto now, realized how hungry he was. Sensei said goodbye to all the students, and asked the young Uzumaki to stay. While the guys were leaving the courtyard of the academy, Elric did not dare to raise his head, but was studying the bark of the oak tree to his left with concentration and attention. Naruto! Iruka called out, smiling. Edward smiled back, showing his acting skills. Abilities. Fortunately, he had them, at least. When life constantly trips you up, willy-nilly you learn to get up with a smile and pretend that everything is wonderful. But in our hero's head now, not everything was as cloudless as he tried to show. A swarm of thoughts buzzed incessantly, not stopping for a moment. A lot of questions, and no answers, and at the same time several sad statements. Edward was ready to give his newly acquired hand to be cut off next time. Victory will not be so easy. Now the surprise effect worked. Apparently, this black-haired boy usually did not even strain himself to defeat the owner of this body. If Elric were an elder in his body, he himself would not have bothered much, and now he is in the body of a 13-year-old boy, whose height is smaller than Edward's height, which, by the way, outraged him in the first place to get into a body smaller than his own. Unfair. He simply does not have enough strength for some things. After all, weak muscles are more likely to tear than to allow a sharp jump from the ground or tenaciously climb a tree, right? That's where it lies, because the brunette is physically superior to Ed, although he lags behind in skills. Elric even became despondent. He will have to work hard to bring his body to at least some semblance of normal. But in Ed's opinion, of course. Edward trained his body since he was 9, and his training was different from the training of the local school children. The main goal was to get the least scolding from Sensei Izumi, so the constant tension of the whole body eventually bore fruit. Here, there are hardly many shinobi who train just as hard, exhausted by their own fanaticism. But most likely, this Uchiha is part of this small circle. Hey Naruto, what are you daydreaming about? A heavy, caring hand fell on his golden head and tousled his hair. Edward shook his head, snorted and tried to smooth down his fluffy hedgehog. Iruka-sensei. He dodged the teacher's hand, which was trying to pat him on the head again. The man smiled affectionately. You're doing well, I'm proud of you, hard training is paying off. The kind voice of this man warmed Ed's soul. But the boy immediately darkened, remembering that the sensei cared not for him, but for the former owner of this body. Thank you, sensei, Edward smiled. But not like Naruto smiled with all 32 teeth, but in his own way, affectionately and sunny. Unpleasant thoughts gradually began to blow out of his head. Let me feed you some ramen? The stomach let out a moan like a dying whale, reacting not so much to the word ramen as to the word feed, because Elric had no idea what this ramen was. That would be great, the guy nodded. He was very hungry, and he was also interested in this man. It seemed he knew Naruto well and treated him well. Perhaps for now, he is Uzumaki's only friend in this world. 2 hours later. Full and stuffed. Edward entered, or rather crawled, into his small dorm room. Now he had some thoughts about how to quickly sort out this world. Overcoming the desire to immediately collapse on the futon, the guy took a diary and several books out of the drawer, after which he sat down at the kitchen table, carefully laying out his things on it. The first thing to study, he thought, is the journal. Actually, he could have started with the various books on jutsu and chakra that he found in one of the desk drawers, but Edward decided to save them for later. From the diary of a rather cheerful blonde, as it turned out, Elric learned a lot of interesting things about his life and found a little in common. Naruto grows up without parents. Edward had a mother, but she died early, and he did not consider Hohenheim's steel as a father. Therefore, Uzumaki, left to himself since childhood, is used to relying only on himself. And he is also very persistent and purposeful. The boy's cherished dream is to become Hokage, so that people in the village would recognize him. It turns out he was very lonely, Elric thought with some sadness. More than anything in the world, the former owner of this body wanted to find friends, but for some unknown reason, the villagers avoided him. In some places, you could come across such strange notes as, "Why do they look at me like a criminal?" As the alchemist understood from the diary, the boy was certainly not sugar, he sometimes did such things. But the painted monuments of the Kage are not a reason for hatred. Ed pulled a clean sheet of paper towards himself and carefully wrote on a news sheet. 1. Understand the strange attitude of the villagers. And grinned to himself. He had changed his body, changed the world, but his habits remained. He was an alchemist, a scientist, he knew how to improvise, but he could not always rely on chance. Steel, like an alchemical formula, wrote down all his plans on paper. But life is not alchemy, and no matter how good the plan was and how close it was to the exact alchemical formula, any intervening factor could break and even radically turn the whole picture of events upside down. Just as not long ago, in his world, Edward had created a plan to return the body to his younger brother, but was mercilessly ignored by fate, which had prepared a slightly different scenario. Realizing that his thoughts were taking him in a different direction, the young alchemist shook himself and continued. The owner of the diary was in love with a girl from his class. He described her in such detail, a beautiful, slender girl with large light green eyes and silky, long, shiny hair of a soft pink color. Edward strained, trying to remember her. Something like that was flashing around this colonel like Sasuke. No, he didn't like her, and he didn't even really remember her. Girls with such a character are not his type. Elric then confirmed several more of his guesses. First, the boy had no friends. Second, his relationships with his classmates were not exactly tense, but rather non-existent. No one was eager to communicate with him, although Naruto himself would have liked to find friends. The only ones who were more or less friendly were a certain Naro Shikamaru and his best friend Akimichi Choji, with whom the author of the diary sometimes played on the playground. They did not avoid him, happily accepting him into the game. On an almost empty sheet of paper, Edward wrote, 2. Improve relationships with others. And then, after thinking, he added, 3. Train the body. The alchemist never finished reading the diary. His eyes were starting to get tired from the small handwritten text, and Elric preferred to open one of the books. Chakra. A Guide for Beginners. Out of habit, Steele took another sheet and drew a picture of a human body with channels of chakra flowing through it. While reading the book, the boy involuntarily made a comparison with alchemy. Chakra is the energy that is constantly in flow, needed to use techniques. But alchemy is also energy, Ed thought, only this energy is not inside the alchemist, but around him. But drawing an analogy did not help in any way, and for the most part only confused the boy. A couple of hours later, having covered another sheet of paper with stupid schemes, Elric crumpled the paper and threw it into the bucket. He got it, although there were many crumpled sheets lying around the bucket itself. Now Edward understood the meaning of why he compared alchemy and shinobi techniques based on chakra. Chakra is the energy flowing inside a person, while alchemy is the energy around him. That is, both here and in his world, if he wants, he will be able to equally use both chakra and alchemy. How confusing it all is, Elric thought tiredly, leaning back. Accidentally, while stretching, the blond boy knocked the coffee cup off the edge of the table. The sound of breaking glass was heard. Cursing, the alchemist lazily climbed off the chair and squatted down, deciding that fate was sending him a chance. Why hadn't he thought of checking if alchemy worked before? A clap of hands and a painfully familiar light illuminated the room. The once shattered cup was shining again. Edward was pleased with the result. Suddenly, a ray of sunlight sparkled in the darkness of the night outside the window. Steele didn't even have time to notice how the sun had set behind the horizon, and it was already dawn? Just like he once studied alchemy with Al until the morning, now Edward was studying the quirks of this world. Sleepily yawning, the boy clicked the switch, and the light of the lamp went out. Time to sleep. And the rest. Tomorrow. God must not like those who break the taboo. It is so cruel, to take something away, to give hope for its return, and then to take away this tiny ray of light. Edward was so eager to pursue his desire when he learned that it was still possible to return Ael's body, and it almost worked. But now the alchemist is far beyond his world, he is not even in his body. Edward woke up quite early, having slept for about 5 hours at most. Now the clock showed 9 in the morning. The boy stretched on the bed, yawned and glanced at his hand. No, it was not a dream. Everything that happened was, unfortunately for Edward, reality. He thought about his brother again. How was he? Had they managed to return his body to him? The blonde threw his hands behind his head and sighed, admiring the ceiling. If only he could find out what was happening to Alphonse now, he would be happier than ever in the world. Even the fact that Elric Sr. could not return to his world for now would not upset him so much. After all, the happiness of each person depends on whether his loved ones are happy. Steele so wants to be sure that everything is fine with his brother. Realizing that he had been lying there staring at the ceiling for about 5 minutes, the alchemist jumped out of bed and went to the bathroom. 15 minutes later, Elric was already standing in the hallway, dressed and shod, closing the door to the small room behind him. Since yesterday Ed had complained a lot about Naruto's body not being trained enough for him, the boy decided to start his day with training. Edward, or rather Naruto, went out onto the porch and breathed in the cool summer air with pleasure. After doing his warm-up, the boy ran slowly down the road, noting to himself that he was not the only one who had started the day with training. Shinobi of different ages were running nearby, throwing kunai, even holding friendly sparring matches. His feet lightly touched the asphalt road, quickly breaking away from it. The fact that the body was not accustomed to such a long run affected his slightly ragged breathing. In his own body, Ed would have gotten tired much later, but now, he already felt tired. Although the real owner of the body had trained very well, for Elric this was not enough. Now the alchemist had firmly set a goal for himself, and was not going to retreat. He stopped running only when it became really hard to breathe. Another world, another body, but still he is he, and he does not like to give up. Steele firmly decided to survive in this world and just live. For Alphonse, Winry, Granny Pinako, Sensei, even for the damn Colonel, he won't give up. Someday he'll definitely find a way to get out of here. But for now. The guy, leaving the shower stall, wrapped a towel below the waist, and froze before even reaching the door. To his right was a large mirror. Elric turned around and looked at himself carefully. A pumped-up torso, arms, a little training and everything would be as it should be. But something needed to be done with the hair. Ed tried to let his bangs down like he had, which of course didn't work out, too short. But he managed to style them normally on his head, using a comb. The hair simply lay in layers. Some were longer, some were shorter, although the strands lay, they did not lose their hedgehog sharpness. A large strand of blonde hair hung down on his face, right on his nose. Strands hung down on the right and left in the same way, framing his face. Despite all this, his hair managed to maintain a certain dishevelment. Realizing that it looked good, Edward decided to wear it like that for a day or two, but his hair rebelled and returned to its previous shape in just a few seconds. The hair's too dense structure does not allow him to twirl it the way he wants, at least until it becomes at least a little longer. Having resigned himself to the situation, Steele decided that since changing his image with a hairstyle had failed, it would be nice to at least change his wardrobe. After all, when else would he do that if not on a day off? 2 hours later. Edward found money in the desk drawer, managed to eat at Ichiraka Ramen, and was now in the clothing store. Steele looked at the bizarre outfits with interest. His gaze fell on black pants made of a material reminiscent of the fabric from his world. The guy was delighted, grabbed a hanger and continued his search. A simple black t-shirt was found rather quickly, but he had to look for a cloak. Finally, something of the same shape was found, made of thick, rough fabric of good tailoring. The only thing was that there was no flannel sign on the back, which, although it upset Elric, gave him a good idea. The hardest thing was to find shoes. There were mostly the same type of shinobi shoes, but in the farthest corner, covered in a thick layer of dust, stood a pair of painfully familiar boots. The alchemist was ready to give his hand to prove that these shoes were the same as his boots from his home world. On the way home, Naruto was already in a very good mood. He even went to the store and carried a large paper bag with groceries. On the way, he met familiar classmates. They looked at Uzumaki's new style with interest. The streets of the village were wide, but branched. With each turn they looked more and more like a labyrinth. When the forest and the academy appeared before his eyes, the blonde realized that he was still lost, but there was no one to ask for directions. "Sorry, I didn't mean to," a crystal clear, girlish voice was heard from somewhere. Edward peered into the distance. Right in front of him, literally 5 meters away, there were several people. 3 boys about his age and a girl. It looked like the trio of hooligans were bullying her. "Hey, look, it's that degenerate Hyuga," one of them said contemptuously. "She only takes us for goats because her family is so cool." Someone else agreed. Sorry," the girl said timidly and tried to run away. "Stop, you creature." One of the boys roughly grabbed her by the shoulder and pulled her towards him. The girl didn't have time to react and fell. "I wanted to get away, but hurry up," the offender didn't have time to finish. "Get away from her," Edward barked rudely. "What kind of morals are these?" He got angry. The guy stood in front of the hooligans. His head was slightly lowered and his bangs covered his eyes. This is Steele. He couldn't leave someone in trouble. Another world, another body, but still he will always be himself. "Get away from her," Edward snapped harshly. You could hear the clanking of steel in his voice. The alchemist didn't raise his head, he was looking somewhere at the ground, his hands clenched tightly into fists, scratching his palms with his nails. He was angry, really angry. Elric hated it when the defenseless were hurt, he hated it when anyone was hurt at all. He knew the value of life too well, so he understood that it was too stupid to waste it on such things as eternal squabbles. Who could it be? One of the boys grinned nastily. That same little demon that everyone hates. Another one chimed in. They were in no hurry to listen to Edward. And what are you going to do to us, huh, demon? Smirked one of the three boys, which made his face, which was not particularly handsome to begin with, look simply disgusting. However, Edward did not see this. Yes, we will simply beat you up, slowly, stretching out each word, the second bully sang in a mocking tone. The girl looked at Naruto with wide eyes, hope and fear were visible in them. Well, why are you frozen? Don't you have the courage? The third boy continued, looking down at the blonde. Don't ignore me, he roared, not seeing any reaction, and raising his hand to strike, rushed at Steel. 3-on-1, and now on 1. The golden-haired boy was expecting something like this. When the enemy was next to Edward, he dodged the blow, dodging slightly to the left, and then Steel only slightly moved his hand to the side, so that a moment later he could bring down a crushing blow to the enemy's stomach with his fist. These boys clearly weren't trained as shinobi. If they were, they wouldn't be inferior to Edward in his new body. The bully coughed, and grabbed his stomach. People like him weren't used to enduring pain. But the golden-haired one had no intention of continuing, he was driven by only one desire to snatch the girl from their clutches. Although, the alchemist would really like to beat these idiots so hard that they would forget about such a thing. The next one jumped awkwardly, throwing his leg forward in the jump, and tried to hit the guy, but he was too familiar with fights. Despite the fact that he always lost to Al. Al, how are you? The blonde thought sadly, but immediately cut off these thoughts, not the time and place. With his right hand, Uzumaki grabbed his opponent's ankle and pulled it up with force. He screamed and fell to the ground, and made no further attempts to get up, apparently having hit the back of his head on a rock. The third one didn't join the fight. He took a few steps back, looking at Edward with fear and anger in his eyes. I'll tell my brother everything. He's a shinobi, the boy exclaimed, retreating. He'll beat you. The boy screamed and ran away. That's what's funny, they're all the same age as the former owner of Steel's new body. The other boys first preferred to crawl away, and then completely disappeared from sight. The guy put his hands behind his head and clasped them together, turning to the still trembling girl. Are you okay? Elric approached her, smiled softly and offered his hand. Yeah, she said, getting up. When the stranger stood up, the alchemist remembered her. They went to the academy together. The girl blushed heavily, and then bowed politely and blurted out in one breath, Thank you, Naruto-kun, for saving me, she finished, closing her eyes. Yeah, you're welcome. The guy smiled broadly and rubbed the back of his head. He wasn't used to this kind of warm gratitude. Although, it was precisely because he was the army's watchdog that he often received contemptuous glances rather than ardent praise. Afterwards, the blonde realized that he himself was not acquainted with the girl, but it would be worth finding out her name, and you. The steel one began somewhat awkwardly, afraid of offending the stranger. I'm Hinata, Hyuga Hinata. You and I go to the academy together, she said a little hesitantly. Sorry, stretching his lips into an awkward, apologetic smile, the blonde scratched the back of his head again. You know, I don't really talk to anyone, looking somewhere to the side. The boy really didn't want to offend Hinata. Maybe I can walk you home? Well, I don't want to bother you, she muttered, embarrassed. Edward would like to make friends here. After all, no one should be alone. And this girl seemed quite nice to him. Kind, polite, open, what more could you want? You're not bothering me at all. The alchemist frowned. But then his face became as carefree as before. Let's go. The whole way young Hugo behaved a little constrained, embarrassed, but she seemed funny and friendly to Edward. During the way the guys laughed a lot, they really had fun with each other. And Hinata and Edward, both so lonely here. Hugo feels like a stranger in his own clan trying to justify the hopes of his father. Elric is really a stranger in this world. In each other, the guys found kindred spirits. Do not get me wrong, they found friends in each other's faces. Now they will both live more fun. His soul warmed, because friends are always great. The alchemist involuntarily remembered his brother, Winry. Sadness again filled his soul for a while, but only for a moment. The thought that now he has a friend here dispelled all doubts. All good things tend to end sooner or later, and here the guys are already standing near the Hyuga house. Then a young man with the same color eyes as the girl, but not particularly similar to her, flies out of it. Hinata-sama, where have you been? Don't scare us so much anymore. Naruto seemed not to notice. The boy smiled slightly, but warmly to himself. Now, his life here would not be so sad and in vain. Edward decided to go home, but it was not so. Shopping, Elric remembered and slapped his forehead. How could he forget? The bags with provisions were left where he met Hinata. Some time later, Steel returned to the place of loss. The packages were safe and sound. The alchemist breathed a sigh of relief and bent down to pick up the apple that had rolled out of the package. There he is, Brother Ichiro, he's the one who beat us all. A familiar voice cried out whiningly. Edward put the apple in the bag and turned around. In front of him stood an unfamiliar guy, a year or two older than Naruto, with a shinobi headband on his forehead. His long black hair was pulled back into a low ponytail. The cold but tenacious gaze of his attentive eyes slid over Uzumaki, examining him with a searching look. Ichiro frowned. So it was you. The guy twirled a kunai on his finger, then accurately threw it at a tree, and then put the kaburo with throwing knives on the ground. I'll have to teach you a lesson. His voice was calm and cold. Uzumaki just sighed. He didn't want to fight, but there was nothing to be done. Revenge for his brother, right? Flashed through his head. Well, he understood this feeling. Although, if suddenly, even though it was impossible, Al did something like that, the golden-haired one would beat him up himself. I have no choice, the blonde said with some heaviness in his voice. I don't want a simple beating. Attack, nodded the shinobi. Edward was confident in himself. What he had gone through had hardened him. Steel was very strong. It's unlikely that this guy will be able to compare with me. Elric thought in vain, oh in vain. Anger, lust, envy, gluttony, greed, laziness, and pride. The 7 deadly sins, they are not called that for nothing. Any of them can blind with equal force. But will Ed's mind, clouded by pride, be able to see the real danger in this fight? It is unlikely. Until he gets burned he will not notice. The golden-haired man chuckled and ran at the guy. Now, the Steel One did not use alchemy. He considered the enemy not strong enough. But is he really right? His enemy, a specially trained shinobi. Edward swung for a blow and ran to meet the guy, just as his younger brother's friend ran at the alchemist himself. Naruto was already in front of Ichiro, when he disappeared in the blink of an eye, and emerged behind Steel. What? How? One light push of the hand in the back, and Edward flies forward, not feeling the ground under his feet. Realizing that if he doesn't stop, he'll crash into a tree, the boy does a somersault right in the air, and ends up breaking upside down with his hands raking the damp earth under his nails. Ed lands on his haunches. His eyes were wide open in surprise. Could someone really catch him off guard? Could someone who had been through more than many adults in his 15 years really be too weak for a shinobi? And it wasn't his body that was to blame. Elric's palms were scratched to the point of blood. Dust had settled into the small cracks. The Steel One gritted his teeth and frowned slightly. He was angry at himself. He had thought too much for himself, and that was the price he was getting. An equal exchange. Exo. He's a shinobi. How could I protect someone when I can't protect myself? No, I won't lose. I shouldn't. The once azure, endless distance slowly turned crimson, to become a dark canvas for thousands of snow-white stars and a bluish moon disk. But that night will not come so soon, and until that moment there are still several long, or not so long, hours. The cool air was clean and fresh. There was no wind yet. There was not a cloud in the reddish sky. The dim rays of the evening sun seeped through the lush green foliage of the trees, and fell on the ground in glare, sliding, shimmering on the young shinobi located under the young branches of a spreading oak. Gusts of cold wind mercilessly tore off the leaves that were slightly drier than the others. Something reminiscent of life in its endless selection. Namely the life of a shinobi where the weak die, like leaves carried away by the wind. A cruel, but how accurate a comparison was thrown to us by nature. Elric froze, still squatting and pushing against the damp earth. His palms burned so much from the friction that they had to overcome the pain of the scratches they had received as a result. Now an iron hand would come in very handy. Gritting his teeth tightly and frowning, Steel looked attentively at Ichiro. He, in turn, looked absolutely cold-blooded. As if this situation did not concern him at all. Well, almost a wrinkle of tension appeared between his eyebrows. Damn. What am I supposed to do now? I can't lose, I just can't. Edward thought. Common sense was fighting with pride. And here's what's surprising, so far pride was overcoming common sense. Elric stood up and froze, in a fighting stance, closely watching his opponent. Ichiro stood completely casually, half-turned and lazily looking at our hero. Oh, Elric will have a hard time until he admits his mistakes. Well, for now, he will have to drink his fill of grief to remember the basic truths of any of the worlds. At least someone will make me sweat, grinning. The Steel One clapped his hands and lowered his hands to the ground. At the same moment, an earthen pillar burst out from under the ground towards Ichiro. The black-haired one did not even change his expression, but the pillar still caught up with the standing youth. At least this is what Elric saw with his own eyes. And as soon as sweet jubilation penetrated Edward's soul, his crystal illusions shattered the cast-iron reality. The pillar had hardly touched the brunette as he instantly disintegrated into several logs. What? The alchemist was perplexed, his gaze twitched nervously. And where is he? He did not understand. Trying to calculate the location of the enemy, the guy turned around and his gaze was met by the one he expected to see the least. Ichiro was displaced from Naruto a couple of steps to the right, but holding the blonde by the shoulder, he quickly hit the Steel One under the ribs. Edward's eyes widened in surprise and unexpected pain. How? So fast. The alchemist thought as the brunette's fist pressed into the soft tissues of the body. Ichiro's thin lips parted, and several cold, yet so righteous words escaped his lips. You're too proud. The shinobi said calmly and quietly. I feel sorry for you. The genin's last words cut through his mind and soul like a sharp blade. It seemed as if this, together with the pain of a heavy and strong blow, finally brought Erlich to his senses. It was like a hot guy being doused with ice water. He finally realized how blind he had been. Blind pride had led him down the wrong path. He was hardly any different from the pride he so despised. Only now did Steel understand the real danger of this situation and saw the physical superiority of his opponent. But he would not give up without a fight. Having managed to catch Ichiro's hand by the wrist, the blonde quickly slid to the side and pulling him by the hand, squatted down, tripping him himself. The brunette only used Edward's technique, going forward with one leg, the other which was still behind. He hooked Steel's leg, at the same time, intercepting his hand and forcefully twisting it, pushed the alchemist. The meaning of the expression, flew like plywood over Paris, was now much clearer. After all, Naruto's legs were torn off the ground, and he flew over the opponent pulling him and fell on the cold ground with his whole body. The pain was felt in his stomach, chest and cheek. At the same time, they also managed to become covered in a fine network of scratches. A quiet groan escaped from Edward's mouth. The guy closed one eye, and watched Ichiro's further actions with the other. But unable to restrain himself, Edward squeezed out. You are strong. But you would do better to use it for good, Steel said with difficulty. His fingers dug into the ground, he tried to push off from the earth. What do you mean? Ichiro asked just as quietly and coldly, placing his foot on Edward's shoulder, but not pressing down too hard, carefully, clearly not wanting to cause serious injury. I would have protected that girl from the likes of your brother, Steel spat angrily. Oh, how angry he was. Ichiro looked at the younger one in bewilderment, and his brother in turn just looked away. Removing his foot from Naruto's shoulder, the brunette turned to his brother. Now tell me, what did you do? How did it all start? He asked menacingly, turning to Tsukiro, that was the boy's name. Ed smiled bitterly. What a turn of events. It's her own fault, she's a Hyuga. Well, the guys and I decided to teach her a lesson. The boy whined, his eyes red. He was ready to start bawling at any moment to justify himself. Ichiro took a few decisive steps towards her brother. The brunette's eyes were in the shadow of his bangs. The corners of his lips slid down. Having come quite close, the guy froze for a few moments. Tsukiro, his eyes wide open, tried to soften the elder's heart, but he was relentless. Swinging, he hit the boy quite hard with his fist clenched right on the right cheek. Never, never offend the weak. Especially your comrades, Ichiro said quietly, but also menacingly. You have disgraced our clan, but first of all you have disgraced yourself. The genin finished and turning around, went towards Uzumaki, who had been watching this picture with surprise all this time, lying on the ground. The brunette began somewhat awkwardly, holding out his hand to Naruto. I'm sorry that everything turned out this way, he sighed. Edward smiled all the same. He learned a good lesson from this battle, getting rid of the pride that blinded him. Elric extended his scratched palm to Ichiro, rising with difficulty. It's nothing. Steele smiled, mentally adding, It's me who should thank you. While our hero was getting used to the new world, and even managed to get into trouble, one of the two previous inhabitants of this body was watching. The red demon fox was watching Edward intently, lazily opening one eye. To be honest, even Kurama himself did not understand why the hell they had given him this smart but strange guy instead of a young, not very smart shinobi. But strangely enough, the demon was interested in this young man. Night dawn is approaching. The sky is strewn with small stars. The crescent moon gave only a dim semblance of light. Silence. The streets of the village are empty, deserted. Only rare puddles reflecting the splendor of the night sky can be found on the winding roads between tall, multi-storied buildings. People tired of the bustle slept peacefully. Their rooms were dark. But in one window a light was burning. Bending over the papers lying on the table, holding a couple of sheets in his hands, the teenager examined them. A wrinkle appeared on his forehead from the tension. The concentration on his face was so unusual for such a young boy. Reading each letter, the blonde bit his lip from diligence. His tenacious gaze ran from line to line. Now, Ed has a goal and some semblance of a plan. He recently decided to study shinobi techniques for himself, so that by merging them in alchemy he could create a gate to move to his world. For the third night in a row, Edward has not slept, studying papers and old scrolls. His brain is filled with fog, the only thing his body asks for is sleep. But Elric's persistence, as always, does not care about the state of his body. After turning the yellowish paper over in his hands for a bit, he put it down on the table and stood up from his chair. The floorboards creaked slightly. With a confident step, the boy headed into the other room, already reflexively feeling for the switch. The sleepy mind did not want to generate sensible thoughts. If it were not for the willpower of the young alchemist, the guy would hardly have gotten up at all. Focus, Elric said to himself, frowning slightly. Ed was swaying. It seemed that at any moment his blue eyes would close, and his body would fall with a heavy crash onto the wooden covering of the old floors. Use not external energy, but internal. Chakra. I can feel it. A determined look pierced the window glass. His hands rose to chest level and folded into several simple seals. For the third night, the young shinobi was trying to master a simple technique. His fingers cut the air for the last time. The blonde froze in anticipation, and nothing. Time after time, his hands drew figures in the air, and Edward tried to feel the chakra. After the 8th unsuccessful attempt, the alchemist decided to reread the documents. Disappointment fought with faith in his own strength, but the desire to sleep clearly won. Right like that, on the table, young Elric fell asleep. The fox grinned. A tough guy. But he wasted too much chakra. Kurama already knew the real reason why our hero couldn't master the technique. But the demon had too low an opinion of people and himself to help the vessel. Remember this scene, it would play an important role in the near future. Morning. Academy. Classroom 15 minutes before the lesson. The sun's rays slipped through the thick green foliage of the trees, standing asymmetrically on the street by the window, and fell in glare on the short-cropped, black hair of the girl sitting at the desk. Her timid gaze of light lilac eyes was directed at the window. But every door creak made Hinata look at the entrance with anticipation of something important. A slight excitement fluttered in the depths of her soul, sometimes boiling up even stronger. She was waiting for a very important person, a friend. The first in her life. And now, finally, the one Hyuga had been waiting for stepped onto the threshold of the classroom. In just a few days, Naruto had changed beyond recognition. The careless, carefree gait of a hooligan boy had disappeared somewhere, and the red cloak with a strange sign on the back added some seriousness. As soon as the newcomer approached the desk, the thin line of the lips stretched into a wide, kind smile. "Hello, Hinata-chan," it came out easily from the boy's lips. To be honest, his first friend in the new world did not allow him to feel sad, did not allow him to immerse himself in the ocean of memories of his previous life. Although, involuntarily, the alchemist thought about Alya. Even now, looking at Hinata, it was not always possible to suppress the restless thought. Of course, how could one not think about one of the few dear people, his own brother? But it must be said, Elric is holding up well. Outwardly, it seems that the internal struggle and lamentations of a tormented soul do not exist at all. Hello, Naruto-kun, the girl said hesitantly, looking away. Her fingers involuntarily grabbed the edges of the sleeves of the sweatshirt, and crumpled the soft fabric from worry. In her soul, too, there was some kind of struggle, modesty and a desire to help. Is something bothering you, and Naruto-kun? Hyuga asked, still finding the strength to look at Elric. But Edward did not have time to answer except to mentally marvel at his friend's insight. Another creak of the door, Teacher Irika stepped onto the threshold. The man's face was serious, his worried, but at the same time stern gaze examined everyone, and finally he said, "The Genin exam is in exactly 1 week," he said. At the same moment, Elric slammed his hand down on the table. His face twisted. Damn it, he thought about the exam with the same horror with which he remembered his beloved sensei Izumi Curtis. His teeth were chattering against each other. Panic could be seen in his eyes. From the outside, it even looked a little comical. But Hinata laughed. "What are you, Naruto-kun, aren't you ready?" the girl asked without laughing. "I'm scared to even imagine what they'll do to me," Ed replied, sliding off his chair and under the desk. "They won't do anything," Hyuga laughed kindly. "They'll just make you study at the academy again," the young kunoichi said more quietly, looking away somewhere to the side. "But if you want, I can help you," Hinata readily offered, blushing deeply and looking at the floor again. A couple of hours later, Hinata and Naruto carefully pushed aside the tree branches and moved deeper into the forest. Stopping in a clearing, the boys had no idea what would happen in a couple of minutes. Shinobi with sound village protectors were hiding in thick, bright green bushes. Their lips were curled in a contemptuous grin. Their glances, full of piercing coldness, but at the same time some kind of cruelty, slid over the blonde and the girl with short black hair. "Thank you for waiting. And I'll also say a big thank you to my new beta for helping me. But kittens, my new beta has disappeared too. I wrote the chapter the day before yesterday, was waiting for the beta, but I don't want to keep you in suspense. Anyway, another chapter without a beta. So I understand that the chapter as a whole is useless and boring, but to somehow dilute it, to be or not to be a battle? That same Jinchuriki boy Kenshin?" A guy of about 20 grinned evilly. His snow-white hair was pulled back into a ponytail. Several strands fell fancifully onto his pale face, and the contemptuous gaze of his dark red eyes bored into the blonde teenager. Casually sitting on a tree branch, he glanced lazily sideways at his colleague from time to time. "It was him, Rinrak-san." The slightly younger boy with short, bright blue hair answered coldly, looking at the children indifferently. In an instant, the blue-haired man appeared in front of the teenagers, and the young man with white hair appeared behind the victims. The children froze in place. The prickly, cruel, arrogant gaze and the absolutely empty expression on his face spoke of the traveler's hostile attitude. Elric, who a minute ago was an ordinary, carefree, chattering teenager, now seemed to have been doused with cold water. In some ways, the boy now resembled a cat that had been caught unawares. Ed slightly hunched his back, put one of his legs back for stability, and with his free hand grabbed Hinata by the wrist and pulled her behind himself. A determined look, too understanding for a child, stopped on the stranger. "Hello, kids," a loud, mocking voice rang out from behind the young shinobi. Hinata turned around and looked at the man. All the girl managed to notice was his thin lips stretched into some kind of animalistic grin. The frightening, thought-provoking image made Hyuga shudder and immediately lower his gaze. Noticing that his friend had flinched, Ed squeezed her hand tighter, as if reminding her that he was nearby. What eyes! I always wanted ones like that, Reenrak drawled ingratiatingly, looking at the girl. Mocking, he stretched out each word, intimidating the young heiress of the clan. What do you want from us? Steel said through clenched teeth, squeezing the brunette's hand again. The alchemist's glare, sparkling with anger, burned into Kenshin. The blonde was angry. How could an adult shinobi intentionally scare a young academy student? You'll come with us, monster, the blue-haired man said quietly. His words, filled with contempt, cut the ear. We'll take your girlfriend too, the gray-haired man continued to grin, still looking intently at Hinata. What do you think, Kenshin? Will the Byakugan look good on my face? Reenrak almost chanted the words, baring the shinobi's snow-white teeth even more. The partner sighed deeply. I'm tired. The blue-haired man ducked and ran. As he ran, the guy made seals. His gaze was fixed on the young Jinchuriki, although it hardly showed any concern. Exo! Ed hissed, pushing Hinata away from the battlefield. Elric immediately squatted down, trying to move as quickly as possible. His palms pressed into the ground, and pillars of earth rose up from under his hands one after another. What the? Kenshin only managed to think when one of the pillars hit the guy right in the stomach. His eyes widened in surprise and pain. How could some genin, even a Jinchuriki, master techniques? Kenshin coughed. His body hung on an earth pillar. Reenrak at the same time decided to attack from behind. Before his partner was attacked, the white-haired one moved like a lazy cat, casually, unhurriedly. But now, his movements became faster, sharper, more precise. He aimed at Edward. Close, the alchemist guessed. Steel frowned, took a step back and leaned his left hand on the tree, preparing for the transformation. In his hand was a small wooden knife, but it immediately flew towards the enemy. The boy used his old trick again, placing his hands on the ground and causing the pillars to grow quickly. This time, they did not grow evenly, but in a random order. The blonde tried to confuse the white-haired man. While the man tried not to stumble upon any of the growths, one appeared under his feet and threw the shinobi back with force. Reenrak hit his back on a large boulder and ended up on the ground. Full Metal wanted to grab his friend and run as far as possible before the opponents recovered, but the body of the older of the opponents turned into a log. What? The genin whispered with just his lips. At the same second, a close combat ninja appeared in front and hit the boy hard under the chest. Ed felt that with this blow a piece of some energy was pulled out of him. His body sank into numbness. A hail of blows fell on the golden-haired boy's stomach and face. With each touch, the enemy pulled chakra out of Naruto. First pain, and then heaviness pierced through. Consciousness left the body. Elric fell. The Jinchuriki was lying on the ground. A pebble was stuck into his cheek. The absent gaze of his empty eyes was looking somewhere through Hinata. The girl was frightened, pressing her palms to her lips and shaking, unable to move. The cold wind was blowing her hair. The alchemist couldn't rise even if he wanted to. He didn't take into account that in this world, everyone has chakra. At the same time, POV Edward. A drop of water fell on my forehead. Another one. My body is so light. I suddenly opened my eyes. Where am I? I feel like I'm lying in a puddle of water. I rise. Around me are brick walls going up into the sky. Exo. I cover my face with my hands. These are my hands. Am I back in my body? I wonder, looking at my unusually large palms, one of which was not tanned. But what is this place? POV is finished. A short guy with long, light golden hair pulled back into a ponytail stood in place. He did not move, only looked first at his hands, and then at the darkness in the depths of the corridor. Edward felt something was calling him to go there, to walk into the pitch darkness. Without realizing why, Steel silently followed the insistent call. The water gurgled under his feet, but was not felt at all. In the complete darkness, even the brick walls were no longer visible, as something bright yellow began to shine in the distance. It seemed that the glowing something was far away, but the alchemist took only a few more steps and had to squint. The bright light blinded the guy. Stupid boy. No smarter than he was, came a low, mocking, but menacing voice. The young scientist's golden eyes caught the outline of a fox's muzzle. The girl looked at her immobilized friend with horror. Her heart was beating wildly, its beats echoing in her ears. Fear held Hinata so tightly in its embrace that it only allowed her to tremble. This kid has a strange genome. I'll have to transplant one myself, Rinrak said lazily, stretching. He had long since turned away from the boy's body. Edward stood up. He was enveloped in a reddish aura. There was a splashing force in him, but his gaze remained meaningful. All the pallor had disappeared somewhere. Steele folded the seals a little slowly and clumsily, but correctly. Elric managed to create a clone. As he said, "Concentrate in the stomach and palms, and not around yourself." The boy smiled sadly. He could control both bodies unexpectedly easily. Ed and his clone stood back to back, and then simultaneously squatted down and hit the ground with their palms. You can see the alchemists cut the segment between the two enemy shinobi in half. Of them, only one was expecting an attack. Kenshin. The ground rumbled, but nothing happened yet. Rinrak turned, his lips revealing a grin of perfectly straight teeth. What a trick! A soft but loud voice rang out over the entire clearing. The man took a step forward as soon as he felt the energy coming from underground. Strange vibrations in the air raised the hair on his head. An unknown animal fear telling him to run as far as possible enveloped the white-haired man. What is this?" he asked hoarsely, grimacing. His throat was dry, sweat appeared on his forehead. A second, a hand from the tree burst out right under his feet and grabbed him. A bright orange aura of chakra could be seen around the hand. There was no longer a crooked smile on Rinrak's face. His face was distorted by a grimace of pain. The man let out a heart-rending scream. The skin around the aura seemed to melt. The same thing happened to the blue-haired shinobi. He didn't even have time to do anything. Edward stood up. His clone remained standing. The boy ran up to his friend, grabbed her hand and led her along. "I don't have much time," flashed through the steel one's head as he ran from behind all the legs. "Hey, are you okay?" the blonde asked as he ran. "Yes," Hinata answered shortly, not keeping up with her friend and trying to catch her breath. In another situation, Elric would have stopped, but now he couldn't. There was no time left at all. Finally, the gates of Konoha flashed ahead. There was still an orange aura around Ed, but it was barely noticeable. The boy himself was sweating and pale, and his breathing was ragged and intermittent. His vision was clouded. As soon as the two crossed the line and found themselves in the leaf, the steel one stopped. He turned around. The aura had almost died out. His lips stretched into an absurd smile. "I'm glad you're safe." He didn't have time to finish. His body became heavy again and fell to the ground. The aura disappeared completely. Earlier, somewhere in Steele's head. "Who?" barely audible escaped from the lips of the squinting blonde. Edward tried unsuccessfully to gather his focus and thoughts. Only after a few moments his eyes got used to the light it became possible to make out the image of a huge fox with many tails. "Shut up, boy!" the fox barked from his cage. He was also squinting, but clearly not from his own light. His narrow black pupil gleamed menacingly. His head was slightly raised above his folded paws. He clearly did not consider Edward a threat, or even a worthy interlocutor. "Now you will listen to me. Where am I? And who the hell are you?" Edward exclaimed discontentedly, looking boldly at the stranger. Elric's fearlessness would only spoil the game for him now. Alas, in one game with a fox, this is far from a trump card. The fox's chakra seethed and spilled out beyond the bars, and then enveloped the young alchemist, taking the form of a hand that squeezed the guest tightly. The blonde got angry and clenched his teeth. His gaze became menacing. A wrinkle appeared between his eyebrows. He did not try to break free. He understood the futility of this action. "Listen, you," the alchemist flared up, but he was interrupted. The fox squeezed the hand, and Steely grimaced fell silent. His face was distorted by a grimace. "Shut up, or you'll die with your girlfriend," the redhead said lazily, but just as rudely. Elric's eyes widened in surprise, his memory returning to him. "Hinata!" But the fox didn't pay attention to this exclamation, and continued. "You and the girl are still on the battlefield. You are completely devastated, weakling. Without my help, you are nothing now, the Biju continued arrogantly, slightly loosening his grip. The Full Metal One played the battle scene in his head. The unfamiliar creature was not lying. Ed was useless now. The realization that now he was responsible for the life of his friend made him shut up and not ask unnecessary questions. It's good that you understood, Kurama continued. Now, you will do everything as I say if you want to survive and save the weakling. The fox's menacing look was frightening, did not inspire any trust, but experience taught Ulrich not to neglect warnings. The Steel One nodded.